working of these ideas with membership. We try to communicate regularly with our membership on topics relevant to technology in the practice, through all committees of AI Columbus, and try to reinforce how the technology can impact all aspects of our profession. So if you'd like to be a member, we're always looking for new committee members and people that have interest. And I think the level that we people find the most sort of interest in our group is kind of right at that kind of project architect or engineer and below. I'm actually, a project architect, and I'm also a principal of BDT Architects and Designers. So I think it's kind of for all levels. But if you have an interest, let us know. So get back onto the presentation here. So today we have from Ohio State University's Facilities Operation Development is Joe Porotowski. I hope I pronounced your last name right, Joe. He's, if you've been working on any projects at Ohio State, he is usually your go-to person for how the work that you're doing in Revit or other building information modeling is integrated with the university system. He's going to kind of give us an update on where the university is at with the implementation. They're known for having a very robust BIM execution standards, and something that has been probably, very, very early, started almost a decade ago now, with the start of the James Cancer and Critical Care Tower, and it's been ongoing in its development ever since. So I'd like to let Joe kind of carry us away for the next hour or so. I think presentation-wise, we're going to try to go about 40 minutes or so before opening up to questions from the participants. So appreciate it.
Thanks. Really appreciate being able to share with everybody. It's a topic I definitely enjoy talking about. I'm sure many of you have maybe heard a little bit about, or maybe you've seen already a lot about, or you may have already interacted with our project delivery standard. And I hope that I can share some new information with you and a little bit of maybe the background of how we got here, where we're headed, some of the changes that have occurred over the last years that we've had a project delivery standard, and to some extent why we've done that. So I'm going to start by just talking in broad strokes about our Buckeye BIM initiative, which is really all of the initiatives that we have under the BIM umbrella here at Ohio State, helping us move towards being a BIM-centric organization, a BIM-centric owner. And the three major parts for us are BIM for existing buildings, which is our process of converting from AutoCAD to Revit-based buildings for all of our existing facilities. BIM for design and construction, which is where I'll spend most of my time this afternoon sharing with you. And then BIM for operations. Where do we go now? What do we do with all this information that we've received out of the first two initiatives? We like to think about this on a continuum from build, which is the process of building our existing facilities, to maintain. How do we maintain those buildings as they change in a BIM world? How do we integrate data that we receive from projects, specifically also from the design and construction process? And then how do we move into the operations phase? How do we start utilizing all of that data we have to actually plan and operate our facilities most effectively? So we've had this project objective from day one, and this goes back now over 10 years, that we want to enhance planning and communication, resulting in improving quality and speed of decision making. And so we keep thinking about, as we go, how is it that BIM can help us as an organization make better decisions and make them more quickly? Now, most of the initiatives that most companies, want to do have this kind of flavor of, we want to make better decisions. We want to make sure that they're better. We want to make them faster. We really believe that a lot of the use cases that we have seen around BIM help meet this goal of ours. Now, there's some times that we come across a BIM use case that really doesn't help us move towards decision making and better decision making. But really, we're laser focused on how do we help the organization make better decisions, make them more quickly, and we've seen that over and over again with our use of BIM. to give you an idea of the timeline, this has been something that we've been working on for a long time, as Nicholas mentioned. We started in 2008, 2009, just thinking about what it might mean as an organization to use for specifically Revit for our existing facilities. And we were able to partner up with some great consultants that really unofficially for the first couple of years would just meet with us and help explain where the BIM landscape was going, what Revit was, how it worked. We were an all AutoCAD shop. 2010, we started getting serious about saying for our existing facilities, maybe we need to convert. Maybe we need to move over to Revit for our existing facilities, and really started to put together a use case or kind of let's say a business plan for that. And then began that process in 2011 in the Med Center. We've been continuing that ever since. And it wasn't until we got into 2011 where we started asking ourselves, but shouldn't we now start using this and requiring it on projects? We had the James, we had a couple other buildings that had come in via BIM. We weren't mandating it, but they came in that way, and we saw the benefits of it. And we were seeing where the industry was going. But at the same time, we were also seeing the value we had from utilizing BIM for existing buildings. So we were starting to become very proficient with Revit and BIM as an owner in these really basic architectural models. And we said, well, we can really apply this to the design and construction process and see some value. And so that led us on a journey from 2011 to the beginning of 2015 in developing a standard, which is what I'm going to spend a good amount of time talking about. And we released that first standard in 2015. But I do want to start off by just giving you a little context, and not too long here, on our BIM for existing buildings project, because it helps you understand kind of what some of the decisions that we made when we started requiring BIM in our larger projects. Some of that comes from what we learned in the BIM for existing buildings. So we've converted about 92% of our university's buildings into Revit. That's 477 buildings, 34 million square feet. We won't make a ton of progress over the next year, primarily because we were not able to hire students this summer due to COVID. But our goal is we should be around 37 million square feet by the time we're done with this entire project. Although, around here we keep building, and so that number is probably going to go up. This number does include buildings that came to us through the design and construction process, although the vast majority of these are ones that we've converted. One of the big ideas, though, that came out of the existing buildings work was this idea of an owner's model. And I think every owner has to kind of wrestle with this. What does it mean? What do you want as an owner? It's not a design intent model. It's not a work intent. It's not an as-built. We like to think of it as an as-maintained. We're going to maintain this kind of information for the life of the building. And so it really meant asking a lot of questions around what do you need? What do we need? What do we not need? And asking a lot of our customers, hey, what's most valuable to you as you are planning the building? So when we started this project, we were really in the planning side of the university. And technically we still are, although we support the operations side much more heavily now. And so we asked the question, what's going to support the planning efforts of the university? And what do we want in the model that's going to help that? What do we not need in the model that's going to help that? But also, what can we reasonably maintain? We don't want to put a bunch of stuff in these models and then turn around to just not have the manpower to maintain that. So we had to kind of balance all these things out. But what that meant for us is that this is what it is. This is our base model. It's a very simple architectural model that we're building. And you can see the items that are included. Now, we have a couple other levels of models. For instance, residence halls, we add a couple additional things. Athletic facilities, we add a couple of additional things. So there are different types of buildings that have a couple additional items in them. But we stick really closely to this list because we have a lot of buildings that we're trying to convert, and we don't want to kind of get out of control with, oh, this would be nice to add this building, this would be nice to add that building. Now, we do use students almost entirely to convert our buildings, and because of that, sometimes they get all excited too, and they're like, hey, I want to put all this other stuff in there, and we got to slow them down. But this also helped us understand what would be most workflows as an owner. And I think this is really important because I know a lot of you that are on the call are working in firms, and you're going to look at some of the use cases here and say, well, yeah, that's really simple stuff. That's what we do, you know, in our sleep kind of thing. But for us as an owner, this is a really big deal. One of the biggest things that we have seen value in is this idea of just communicating design intent. You can look at the top two pictures there. Simple things like furniture layouts or doing some simple different layouts or renovations to space. Now, we can do all this in-house, and we don't have to spend money, especially before a project is even potentially funded, to get an idea of what a space might be, what it could look like. And we actually have a student-led design studio that does a lot of this work in-house, and it just allows the students to get a lot of experience, and it allows us to try new ideas before having to spend a whole lot of money on them. We also have seen improved accuracy. So converting from AutoCAD Revit has really improved the accuracy. We're doing a lot of field verification as part of that. We're adding a lot more data to the Revit models than we had within AutoCAD, like say windows and the size of windows. We just did, you know, it's not something easily can be shown in a 2D drawing, especially from a top-down 2D drawing. Effort improvements. We find that maintaining our Revit models is easier from purely a renovation occurred, we're going to update the drawing. Now, Revit has a whole lot of other, you know, kind of heft around it that takes time to manage. And so we've had to automate some of that and use other methods and other systems to help kind of mitigate some of that. But from the day-to-day stuff, it seems to be, for us, a little bit quicker to keep the models up to date. Models are intelligent compared to AutoCAD. You know, they understand what a space is, they understand what a door is, they understand what a plumbing fixture is. And the future of where we're headed is being able to aggregate all of that data in a database and be able to do a lot of additional reporting, like how many toilets do I have in this building, or how many toilets do I have in these 300 buildings, and be able to pull some of that data and use it as we operate our facilities. And they also serve as a future foundation. So we can build these architectural models that are relatively straightforward and simple, but then as projects occur in buildings that may only be some sort of mechanical project or plumbing project, if there's a model available, we can bring those in and they can be part of, they can, you know, be linked in and be part of that process. And you can see in the bottom left, we actually have the College of Engineering. They have a laser scanner and have been taking our architectural models and then building, with some student help, additional MEP work that's in a lot of their facilities. And so they've been able to use our models as a foundation and then build on top of it. And then just for fun, bottom right-hand corner, you know, we are now well into the agricultural side of things at Ohio State, building a lot of barns. This happens to be a swine facility. And I promise you, in real life, this does not look that pretty, but we let the students run with it and develop a little rendering of each building that they complete. And they made this swine barn look just magnificent. So I love that. But we do that. And so again, it's just the ability to be able to see buildings three-dimensionally and understand them has been a big improvement for us. So that gives you just a little bit of context. I'm going to get into the meat of this, which is what we're doing with BIM for design and construction. And the first thing that we started off with in late 2011 was this idea of a BIM feasibility study. Now, if you would have asked me, I would have said, hey, we should do a BIM standard. It's a no-brainer, but we wanted to make sure that we really looked at the issue very critically, but also tried to measure the value of having a BIM standard. And so we brought in a consultant to look at our organization and really think about, if we were using BIM more holistically and more completely and mandating it, what would it look like? What would be the value to our organization? And so they came up with a lot of, you know, statements, right? So it's going to improve project planning. It's going to improve the quality of construction documents. We're going to have better data handover. These are all things that most of us on this webinar understand, right? These are obvious things, but we were able to document them. But what was most important to us is that we're able to look at 3 different projects and say, look, if we were to have used BIM from the very early stages of that project and then use it through the entire building life cycle, what would be our cost benefit? What would it look like? How would that help us numerically? And so what we came up with was, on average, we would see a cost avoidance of around 7%. That's not cost savings, because that's not really how it would work out. But if we were to use BIM holistically this way, we would see a pretty big value. And on an average year, this is between $15 and $20 million in cost avoidance. Now, we're never going to see 7% because that's kind of in the almost, completely perfect world. But even if we saw 1 or 2%, we're talking about millions of dollars. And so that was enough for leadership to understand, look, there's a real value in how BIM might affect the way that we design and construct buildings and how we operate them. And so we're able to move forward with the development of a BIM project delivery standard. Now, I do want to define this a little bit. Most of us are probably aware of it, but for our purposes, a project delivery standard typically answers two questions. One is, how's that project going to be executed? What are the nuts and bolts of that project? How are you going to do it from a BIM perspective? But then also, how will your deliverables be formatted? Now, at Ohio State, we're not really very prescriptive about how to run a project. We have some expectations. We have some BIM goals we want you to meet, but we're not going to get into nuts and bolts. We're not going to tell you, do this exactly this way. We're really focusing almost entirely on the turnover documentation. What do we want to see from this project that we're going to receive either during the project or at the end of the project? And so that's where our focus has been. And what I want to do though is kind of walk you through kind of our process of developing our BIM PDS. And so this is just kind of a general outline of how this project occurred. We put out, we scoped out what we wanted, and then we put it out for RFP. We were able to get a great team that was an amazing partner to us that came in and helped us develop this standard. And the first big steps were this discover and generate phase, where they just dived in deep on how our organization was functioning as it applied to our project delivery. Looking at processes and data flows, having focus groups of 20 or 30 people and with a cross section of people saying what's working, what's not, interviewing individual people. I'm going to show you some of this stuff here in a second, but just really getting a sense of the organization and how things were functioning. Coming out of that then was the document phase. We know all this now about your organization. So here's how we would build a BIM standard that works for you as an owner. And then from there, we had the standard, but we didn't want to stop there. We wanted to make sure that we had a way to implement BIM and this standard as an owner most effectively. So we worked with a consultant also to build a BIM implementation plan, which I'll talk about. And following that is this whole idea of this analyze phase, this ability to refine things as going forward. And we continue to revise our standards, continue to revise our workflows so that we can improve the way that we utilize BIM and how we use BIM on projects over time. So back to those first two steps, understanding the current environment, it's really trying to understand organizationally, when do we need stuff? What do we need? When is that supposed to get to us? What is painful in the current process? What's working in the process? And we spent a lot of time, over a year, really trying to understand the environment and develop a standard. So this was something where it was a pretty deep process. One of the benefits of really spending time to talk with people and understand what's working, what's not working, is that they got buy-in to the final result. We were going to be changing the way that projects were delivered. There's some additional work that had to be involved with that. And people understood, though, that we were trying to solve problems that they felt were part of the delivery process. And so it really helped when we got into the part of actually doing it and implementing it. One of the things you see from this type of thing is this was our data flow. It's a lot going on, right? It's pretty spaghetti-like. And I'm not going to say all of this has been solved since then, but this gave us a good sense of how the whole organization was moving facilities type data around. And then where can BIM kind of play a part in solving some of that? In addition, they really worked on understanding all the data elements. Every single piece of data around our facilities, our buildings, our spaces, our assets. What do you got? Where is it? Which system is in? Who manages it? Who edits it? Who sees it? And this was a gigantic spreadsheet, and just understanding our entire data environment. And if you're seeing a theme here, BIM for us is very data driven. One of the biggest values for BIM for us is the kinds of data that we have access to that we have not in the past. And so that's one of the big benefits that we saw coming out of our process. Now, coming out of all this, it was clear there were going to be a number of key outcomes that we hope to see by developing a standard, developing an implementation plan. And I'm not going to read all these, I'm just going to focus on the highlighted ones, but we wanted to explore how BIM could reduce the total cost of operations and ownership. Critical for us is that this had to help us do things in a more cost-effective way. In addition, we wanted to leverage all this data, as I mentioned, to streamline the turnover process and then be able to get all the data into our new and also future technologies. So how would we take all this rich data that we would get from a BIM-centric design and construction process and use it as an owner? And then also redefining this contractual stuff, right? Not the most enjoyable part, I would say, but we had to figure it out. We had to understand, what do we need to change contractually? How do we change the RFPs? How do we change the building design standards so that we can ensure that we get the deliverables that we want? And so that led us to develop this BIM project delivery standard. It's not terribly long. One of the things that was great about working with the consultants we worked with, who represented an AEC and a construction firm, was that this might be something that they have to live with, that they would actually have to be on the receiving end of. And it was important to us as owners to say, look, we want a delivery standard that helps meet our needs, but we don't want something so onerous that everyone is just challenged to work with us. It would, it would cost a lot of extra money or a lot of extra time. That's not what we wanted. And so it's only around 20 pages long, the standard, and it includes things like, what are the BIM use cases and what do we mean by that, and how do we want, what are we looking for from a BIM perspective? Who are the different project participants? And then the meat of it is around the deliverables. What are the deliverables and how do we want them to be developed? Now you can see all this. If you are unfamiliar with this, you can get this at fod.osu.edu/resources. On the right, you're going to see a little picture of that web page. And you'll see the third tab there has design guidelines, specs, and standards. Under that, at the bottom, in the middle of that is the building information modeling. Everything that we have that I'm going to talk about is all available right there that you can download and check out. So moving on to deliverables, like I said, we're very deliverables focused. That's really what we're all about when it comes to our standard. The very first deliverable that we have is the BIM execution plan. And this is going to have two deliverables. There's going to be 2 times when this gets delivered to us. One is right after all the design partners are on board, and then the other is when all the contractor partners are on board. And so this is the document that helps describe to us how you are going to actually execute the project. Like I said, we're not going to tell you necessarily how to do these things, but we want you to help us understand. We want to understand from you how you're going to do them. So basic things like what project information, kind of, top of the title sheet type stuff. What's the project schedule and milestones, really focusing on the BIM milestones in this case. How are you going to meet the different the BIM goals that we've set? Tell us how you're going to do that. Who are the different project participants? How are you going to collaborate between you and all your partners and the contractors? How's that all going to work? Describe that for us. Show it to us. How are you going to transmit your models? And what software are you going to be using? What versions are you going to be using? How are you going to meet? And how is that going to work? I'll get into the model element table here in a second, but also things like, let's talk about coordinate systems and model structure and the floor level and elevation naming conventions. Now, one of the most important things about the BIM execution plan for us is it really serves as a communication tool. So this gets just delivered, and then we sit down and we have a BIM kickoff meeting with all the relevant parties inside Ohio State and as part of the team. And we're going to review this and we're going to say, okay, what about this? I don't understand this, or this is a little not what we're looking for here. And how are you going to do this? And it really serves as a way to make sure that everybody at the very beginning of the project is really on the same page and that they understand the expectations in the project delivery standard and how they're going to execute the project going forward. Now, the LOD matrix of BIM deliverables is part of, it's a separate document obviously, but it's part of the BIM execution plan. And it's our way of describing to you, what do we want to see modeled? What is the LOD of that particular element? And then what do we want to have tagged? What do we want data provided to us? So you see here that we say, here's the LOD for these particular items for the design intent models and for the conform design intent models. We want the teams to fill in project, what the models are going to look like at the project stakeholder deliverable, and then also the trade coordination models. And then we want you to let us know who the model element author is going to be for those types of things. Obviously, there's some additional notes on the right there. And then we identify, here is what we want a tag on, and here's what we're going to want data, what we want COBie data for. And this is the way that we communicate to the teams and the way they communicate back to us. And this serves as a way to make sure everyone's on the same page with that. Now, there are two different versions of this one. There's one for non-med center buildings, and there's one for med center buildings. Med center requires quite a bit of additional data to be delivered through a project. So that last column there, the asset tag column, has a lot more in it. And beyond that, everything's the same, but that's the big difference. So those two items, as I mentioned, those things happen right at the beginning of design, beginning of construction. Towards the end of the project, then we have the rest of the documentation. And the first piece is the interim conformed design intent architectural and structural BIM submittal. A lot of words, obviously, but I think we all understand what they mean. For us, we mean conformed is we're just saying, look, keep your models up to date. Keep those design intent models up to date throughout construction. And we're going to ask for an interim set of just the architectural and structural models about 2 to 4 months prior to occupancy. The data set when we review that BIM execution plan. And those models then become our internal owners' models. That's the models we're going to take, and we're going to put it through our kind of standardization process. And then that's what we're going to use long-term in our organization. This is really critical to us because so many systems within Ohio State require those models and the data to be in our systems because there's so much downstream information that gets pulled from those models. Our E911 system, our work order systems, our IT systems, all require that space information that we receive from the Revit models to be in place prior to occupancy. And so that's why we have this deliverable. Now, hopefully at 2 to 4 months, if everyone's been keeping the models up to date, really should not be a lot of changes after that in the architectural structural models. Typically, if there is, it's because we as the owner probably asked you to change something way too late in the process. It happens, but usually that's a pretty good spot for us. We also use Revit Model Checker to provide some early checks on certain items within our standard that we can actually use the Revit Model Checker to check. And just as a kind of, again, a communication tool, run it, see what it says, allows you to maybe identify some issues that might be there. Then obviously about 120 days after the project's over, we're going to get the record set. That's just going to be a fully conformed set of design intent models for all the disciplines. And then I'll talk a little bit more about this, but then we have the data piece, the COBie and asset worksheet piece. Now we do have we try not to be too prescriptive about how the models should be developed, but we do have some requirements. Some around rooms and spaces and how they should be developed. We talk about hosting of elements to approved floor levels. So we are pretty particular about saying, here are the approved floor levels and exactly what they should be named, and that any element that you see in that LOD matrix of BIM deliverables that we want data for, that we want to tag on, needs to be hosted to that particular one of those approved levels. Now, we know this is probably one of the more painful things, depending on the building, because you're really limited in the kinds of levels that you can use. And so this is always one of those areas that we have to really talk through and think through. But this is important to us because of all the downstream issues regarding how that data is used, internal systems, and how the data is exported out of the system too. We want no typicals or prototypes. We want all the geometry to be modeled. We want clear and descriptive family names, especially when we are exporting the data and it may not have, we want to make sure we understand what it is. We would very much prefer people do not use families that were not created in Revit. We're not mandating that doesn't happen. We know it happens, but it definitely helps when we avoid that. We also want to limit the use of model and place families to things that truly are unique and make sense. One of the challenges, things I mentioned, is that we really are starting to extract data from our models and use them in other ways. And honestly, when you have a model and place family, you just can't get much from it. It's pretty useless. So we don't really understand what it is. You can't standardize that kind of data. And then another items, we just want to remove all the demolished components from a model before it's delivered to us. So there's a couple other smaller ones too, but these are the kind of the bigger ones that we are asking to happen before the model is turned over to us. Now, I mentioned the COBie and data piece, and I will say that this has really developed a lot over the years, and it's definitely still one of the more painful parts. So I'll talk to you about where we're headed with this too. But we now use, we standardized on, have standardized on COBie for now as a way to get data out of those design intent models. And so there's a COBie extension that's provided by Autodesk. We have like about a 15-page document that goes step by step on how to run that COBie extension in the way that we need it run, so we get the data out of the system the way we need. And once that process is done and you get the data out of the system in a COBie spreadsheet, then, and this is the kind of data we're talking about. We're not asking for a ton of asset data, but here are the basic information that comes out of there. And a lot of it's gonna be blank, obviously. If you look at some of these, like, you're not gonna have warranty dates, you're not gonna have manufacturer. We understand that. They're placeholders. But once you get that COBie data out of the models around the end of 3D coordination, then the AE was going to run a macro to convert that to a simple spreadsheet. We provide that macro, and that takes COBie, which if you've ever seen COBie spreadsheets before, they're just like a gigantic number of tabs, and they're all kind of connected behind the scenes. It's a pretty confusing thing to look at. And unless you really understand what you're looking at, it's even hard to understand if you did it right. And that's one of the challenges with it. But you can run this macro, which then kind of cleans all it up and provides it in a single tabbed spreadsheet. And then that's turned over to the contractor. Contractor is going to fill in the remaining information and turn it over to university at occupancy or slightly after, depending on the type of project. We now will then use that to load directly into our CMMS. So a process that used to take us a couple of years usually to collect all that information manually now is loaded into our systems within days of receiving it. And we've done this in a number of projects. It's been successful, and it works, but it's not user friendly. And this is definitely an area in which is a struggle. And so where we're headed now is we're going to be developing a custom plugin to simplify this process. We've been working on this for probably about a year, but funding has been kind of shut down since March-ish, and just finally we were able to finish this PO up actually just this week. And we're going to be creating a plugin that will provide to teams that will do a lot of the stuff that the COBie export tool does, but behind the scenes, so that all you need to do is just run it with hopefully the most minimal set of instructions, and the data will be exported out in a very simplified format instead of having to go through a macro to clean it up. It'll make it a lot easier for teams to read it and understand if it worked or not. And it's also going to help reduce the number of assets that are in that list. And one of the challenges with the COBie toolkit is that you've got to specify which things you want exported, and you're going to have to refer to the LOD matrix of BIM deliverables to determine which ones should be exported. And we're going to make that better. We're not going to be able to make it perfect. And so there's still going to be some hand cleaning that has to happen no matter what with that spreadsheet before it's ready. We're trying to reduce that as much as humanly possible. We're hoping to have this complete by the first half of 2021, and we'll start using that on projects, which should really simplify this whole asset data deliverable part of the project. Now, just to give you kind of a high level view, I know there's a lot going on, a lot of bubbles here, but this is really just to kind of show you then from start to finish what's going on. And this is actually available in the project delivery standard. So if you ever really want to look at this more closely, you can just download it and see it. And you can kind of see how the whole project progresses, and what happens with different types of models throughout the entire project. So this is just kind of giving you a sense of kind of how we think about BIM as it moves throughout the project. So that's our standard, and it gives you kind of hopefully a good view of the standard. But I want to shift into our BIM implementation plan. As I mentioned, we really wanted to make sure that we had a plan for utilizing BIM and not just putting a standard out there and hoping it worked. And we saw that with other owners that developed really great standards, but they just kind of left them out there, and they didn't have as much success, we felt. And so we really broke this down into 3 parts: people, technology, process. On the people side, 2 different pieces: training, making sure we're training our people internally as well as we could about the standard. And also, when we first delivered this in 2015, we did a big town hall to let everyone know, here's what we did, here's why we did it. We also identified a position that's kind of changed a little bit, morphed over time, but now is the closeout coordinator, and this position that supports the project manager from the very beginning of a project to the very end in making sure we get the right deliverables. And this position supports not just BIM related projects, all projects, but but it's especially helpful during the BIM project process, ensuring we get the BIM execution plan complete, having those BIM kickoff meetings, and ensuring at the end that we get the data that we want. From a process perspective, making sure we had pilot projects early on, and also thinking through the revisions to our standard over time. You've seen we've had 5 versions now over the last 6 years, 6 full years that's been out, and every year we make some adjustments, and I'll talk a little bit about that. I mentioned Kobe in asset data. We really made some adjustments on that since the very beginning version, which we just kind of said do it, but we really had no framework around it at all. And we're always working on integrating this great data with GIS, which I'll show you towards the end. From an evolutionary standpoint, here's some of the things that have changed since that first version. We expanded the LOD matrix from uniformat level 3 to 4. This was primarily driven by the project team saying, look, if this isn't detailed enough, we need to understand a little bit more closely what you want. So we made that change. We removed the use of LOD 500, which was honestly quite confusing most of the time and really didn't offer us much value. We removed the requirement for the contract team to turn over their documents. We don't really use those. We've never asked for those in the past. As I've mentioned, we had a lot of changes to the way that Kobe and asset data is handled. We've released the OSU BIM PDS tools. It's a zip file there up on that website I mentioned. Includes things like the Kobe toolkit, rule set and instructions, and the Revit model checker, and the macro. So all those tools that we're providing to help kind of meet our expectations. Now, our BIM project delivery standard is only required on projects over $4 million, but we've seen more and more internal project managers saying, I want to use this on a project less than that. And we've also seen projects just say, I'm going to use BIM on this project. So we've made some adjustments in our RFP. So if it's a project below $4 million, we can say, you will still be using the standard, but you're going to use it in a little different way. You can call it the BIM PDS Lite. And so we have got some language in there for the project manager to identify what that light version is. And also we made some changes in the standard itself to kind of handle for those less than $4 million project requirements. I do expect eventually that we're going to lower the threshold of requiring BIM at some point, but we're just not there yet. And even minor things like we don't require the project base point to be updated in the model before it's delivered to us anymore, which we did in the past. We just need to have the project base point information delivered to us textually, and we'll update it ourselves. Some of the things that we're looking to the future, to give you a little insight, we always have a lot of small things we're looking at, little tweaks here and there, but we've really been investigating the use of BIM 360 and what it might look like for us as an owner to actually purchase 360 and require it to be used in all of our bigger projects. I don't know if that's going to happen or not. We're definitely spending a lot of time thinking about it and investigating it and working with Autodesk and making and seeing how, if it would be value to us. But that's one thing we're looking at and how that might help in the delivery of projects and the management of projects, and especially the review of projects. We're already starting to see use of BIM 360 internally for doing design work and say we're doing the furniture model or the equipment model, and we're working on some of these bigger projects that a lot of you are aware of. And how does our internal teams work effectively with our external partners? And so we're starting to see use of BIM 360 design in that way already. So what would it mean to actually do that more holistically across all of our projects? We're also investigating the use or the inclusion of uniformat or master format information in our families. Not sure again if this is going to happen, because it sounds a little scary and probably a little concerning to probably some people. And I understand that. We're looking at how this might help us to do better cost estimating and understand the data that we have in our models more effectively. So these are some of the big ideas that we're throwing around right now as a university, along a lot of smaller stuff too. On the technology side, I mentioned we actually have model checkers that we have provided that help you understand where the model's at. Talked about the Kobe toolkit. I'm going to talk a little bit a second here about the BIM middleware piece. And we played around with VR and AR a little bit. Not sure. We found some basic uses for some of it. Some of it, the technology just still isn't there yet. And from the contract side, I mentioned that there's a lot of little things we had to change. The way the RFP and RFQs are worded, the way our building design standard references the changes that are required for BIM. We had to develop our own spec docs so that we can make sure that our BIM requirements are actually adhered to for all the project participants, something we didn't recognize when we first put this together. So a lot of little changes when it came to the contract side. So that's how we kind of identified how we would implement BIM. And I will tell you that it's been really helpful to have a guide for how we would make BIM happen here as an owner, and has helped us to be successful over the last 10 years now, but specifically last 5 years of having the standard. And I'll mention really briefly here some of the things we're doing from an operations standpoint. We really want to be able to take these great models and get them into our GIS, not only just two-dimensionally, but also three-dimensionally. We do a lot of work two-dimensionally, and that works very well. Three-dimensionally is where we are challenged. We've been working with Esri and a lot of research on how can we get 400 models into a 3D GIS and actually make it function well. And we've been making a lot of progress, and you can see here just a little portion of our campus. And those are actually models that have been brought in, and it actually works in a web browser pretty well, but it's still in the research phase. We're still continuing to work on that. Part of the benefit of having the standard is having really good standardized models that speed up the ability to get our data into our CAFM, our space information system. In addition, this is where we're headed though. This BIM middleware is where we want to be. Some sort of technology that's going to allow us to look at these models in a web browser and connect to all sorts of data systems around the university. Because what we really want is for that staff member out there doing work, we want them to, from their tablet, be able to access any piece of information they need to manage our facilities. We want to, again, speed up the ability to make decisions and make better decisions by giving them all the data. Not there yet. This has been something we've been talking about for years. Really, there's some technology limitations, and then just really some financial limitations too around doing this. But this is where we're headed, and we continue to put the pieces together to get closer to this end result that we really want to see. Really see this as being a really big part of the value of everything we've been doing. We've already seen a huge amount of value by having all that rich data available to us really early after the project's over. But how can we now then get all the rest of the graphical data and then start tying everything else across the university together? Some lessons learned for you to wrap up here. And these lessons are really from our perspective as a single owner who has a ton of buildings, and we're going to have those buildings for entirely too long. And so first is just proper planning. We, throughout this entire project, we've always been asking ourselves what needs to be modeled, what are we actually going to use, what can we maintain, what's going to have the best ROI for our organization, and really focusing in on those things. Not developing a standard that says, give me every piece of information about every asset, but what are the 10 things you really need to know about every asset? Let's start there and be successful at that, and then we can grow it over time. Effective training. Now, as I mentioned, we use students to model all of our existing facilities. So we have really well documented processes. We do a lot of training with them. But that's not all. We also do annual training on Revit and even AutoCAD, but a lot more on Revit, so that all this great BIM data that we have can be utilized by lots of our end users. So we conduct lots of training internally for OSU staff so they can use all this data well. We don't want to just keep this for ourselves or just have my team who is really BIM savvy and Revit savvy. We want to make sure everyone else that wants to can use it too. We're always continually improving. We're always adjusting the way that we build our existing facilities, and we're always looking at our BIM project delivery standard and thinking about how to make that better. And as I already mentioned, we're still continuing to make improvements in our turnover data process. We've standardized everything. Everything is standardized, naming conventions, just everything is as standardized as we can get it. The way that we bring models in from a project, at the end of the day, they look very similar in a lot of ways to the models we built from scratch, except they have a whole lot more data, so that they are well standardized. When we have this many models that we have to manage, they have to be consistent. Otherwise, we'll go a little crazy. But that also helps us to automate a lot. Model checking software, family management. We have a lot of plugins that we've written to help us with the CAD to BIM process and to help with the BIM to BIM process, as we call it. We also have a plugin that we've written to help us update our models every year, because that's such an arduous process, and we have a lot of them we have to update every year. And frankly, that plugin alone has saved us from a lot of the labor it takes to do that with the number of models we have. And partnering and collaborating. What's been critical to us is making sure we understood internally what our customers cared about, what our stakeholders cared about, and making sure we met their needs. But also externally, we've had some amazing consultants and partners over the years that have helped us in our entire BIM journey, because they had knowledge we didn't have, and they were able to help us be successful and get to the point that we are today. And I will end with this kind of thought for you, especially for most of you on this webinar are in the AEC industry. is I think there are ways for you to help owners. I think one way is to raise awareness with them is how do you help educate owners on how BIM affects project delivery, taking a little bit of time just to help them understand that, hey, we're using BIM in this project and here's how it can help you. Or educating owners on how BIM can be used by themselves after post-occupancy. Or just make sure you deliver good, high quality turnover documents so they can see the value that comes with BIM. But then moving into a partnership role, and which is exactly what we've had for a number of years now, is how do you partner with owners in developing standards and expectations? There's a real opportunity for you to come in and help owners think through that, or helping just getting to understand their processes and pain points and helping them to understand how BIM might be helpful. Or maybe helping owners develop plans to maintain BIMs. Maybe they don't have the staffing to do it themselves. Maybe that's something that you can help with. If they want the value of having a model long-term for themselves, but they don't have the staff, that's another opportunity. Or providing services to develop a FM model, a facilities management model that's all cleaned up and ready to go, that's specific to their use case at handover. Or just helping them get data out of the models and out of the project so they can use in post-occupancy. These are all opportunities that you have to, I think, provide additional services to owners after you've gotten them to the point where they understand that they want it. Lastly, ongoing challenges. We continue to think about how do we maintain our models most effectively? How do we deal with those yearly upgrade cycles? How do we maintain our MEP models? We don't have staff to do that right now. We're not using them a ton right now in operations. As we do, I expect there's going to be more of a desire to make sure we keep those things completely up to date. How do we collaborate with other departments on campus? We're looking at putting in another system right now so we can better share data and also be able to aggregate data and share models across campus. There's always some wrinkle to a delivery method we didn't think of before that affects the way we think about our delivery standards, and we have to make some adjustments on that. How do we best leverage all that data we're getting, not just the textual data, which we're doing good on, but then the graphical data too in operations. And lastly, then visualizing the entire campus three-dimensionally. I showed you a little bit of that. How do we take all this great Revit data and then start using it in this really massive aggregate way? So that's what I have to share with you today. I know we have about 10 minutes left, and I welcome any questions that you might have.
Thanks so much, Joe. We do have a question here in the chat. It comes from Joshua Design Group. He's worked with you in the past on a more simplified asset spreadsheet, and is looking ways to export into Revit. The new plugin that you talked about, is that going to replace even that process?
Yeah, I mean, we're hoping to make this really dead simple and just have a simple plugin that's going to get you the data you need. Now, there are definitely probably some other ways to achieve it, and that especially just developing schedules that can just be exported as is. And that's kind of the idea, is that behind the scenes, that's essentially what it's going to do. At the end of the day, I think we'll be a little less prescriptive about using our plugin versus using something, say, like building your own schedules to get the data out of there, as long as we just get it in a simplified spreadsheet. And that's kind of where we're headed with it.
Another question is, I know a lot of, you mentioned BIM 360 and other processes. So there's basically where you consume the model in the BIM 360 of your consultants, or you perhaps link the model with your consultants. Can you describe a little bit about that process of, the fact that a lot of the items, especially that you're looking for the higher level of deliverable, it might be coming from an MEP consultant, and the architecture, that process of combining those two models, what the university is typically looking for?
Looking for in which perspective exactly do you mean?
With basically making sure all the models are combined in your sort of, I think you described it as the sort of as maintained goal.
Yeah. I guess the best way to, and I hope I answer your question here, but for the process really is that we're going to receive the full kind of set of record models from, it's going to come through the AE, obviously, and through usually a single point of single person that's aggregating all that information, that's passing it off to us in eBuilder. That's just our tool our tool right now that we use for all of our project delivery. And so we're taking the model. We are going to review it a little bit to make sure that it's what we want it to be, and there's no major issues with it. But by and large, a lot of that's handled by the AE before it gets to us. Did I answer your question? Because if I didn't, ask it again.
No, I think that's it. And then with looking at BIM 360, are you planning if something like that is implemented, which is again like a cloud-based, where you're more part of the process
Sure.
earlier on than later at the sort of 2 to 4 month stage before occupancy?
Mm-hmm. So go ahead.
Yeah, I guess, so what would the timeline, and again, it might not be the BIM 360 product, but I guess what do you see then the value in using something like that that's cloud-based a little
Yeah.
bit?
You know, the deliverables don't change in that world. I think and we're still trying to identify whether it makes even sense. So I want to be very clear is that we're very early on that process. But some of the things that we're looking at is if we had 360 and we were actually providing it and saying use this please, or just use this, I guess, it allows us to understand a little bit better and be more engaged in the process. It also allows us to have tools to review the models three-dimensionally, as opposed to, say, using 2D, which is still a lot of our drawing, our review process is still very 2D focused. So how can we move away from that and actually have tools in-house that allows us to review the model three-dimensionally, mark it up, comment on it? And something as simple as 360 Docs would allow us to do that. And so that's one of the things we're looking at. It's not really the intended to be a policing thing where, oh, we're just checking in on your models all the time, but just more of a, how do we help the data transition from, say, the design process to the contractor, to the contractor side of the house? How do we actually make that work better? How do we make the data move a little bit better? How do we use other tools within 360 to collect all the data, as opposed to pushing some spreadsheets around all the time? And how do we get those models at the end of the project in a way that makes sense to us? So you're still going to have these deliverables where we say, look, let us know when that interim set is ready to go, and we're going to download it at that point. But we think there's going to be other benefits to being more engaged in the process and helping the data move between partners a little bit more effectively. Don't know where that's going to land yet, but we're just looking into it right now.
Hey, Joe, it's Andy. First of all, thanks for speaking again tonight. Great presentation as always. One thing I haven't asked you over the 6 years is, how has the old deliverables that you used to require changed? Because I think when we started launching these deliverables, you were still keeping the other ones, like the old PDF files or whatever. Have you found that you've stopped requiring the old deliverables at this point?
Yeah, well, we can't, because state law mandates that we still receive 2Ds for everything. So a lot of and that is a little bit, can be frustrating for some of us, and that we still have to take AutoCAD sets and then PDF sets of all of our drawings. Now, I think when you first started your question, I was thinking about the kinds of models we received before our BIM standard was in place, and those were the kind of wild west. I mean, they were definitely, first of all, it was even earlier in the use of BIM in the industry. So they were just some maturity issues there, but also they were just we were getting whatever we were getting. But now the quality of models is so much higher, but we still have to we still need our PDF sets, we still need our DWGs, because that's just part of our requirements, more of a state law issue.
Then the other question I had that I hadn't touched base with you in a while, have you been able to take advantage of any integration on the Evolve FM from the space management, to where it's helping you drive maybe some units straight out of the model to help you with space planning? And more specifically on your medical center side, is it helping you with the maybe your Medicare, Medicaid reimbursements, research planning, and all that?
Yeah, so there's not a direct connection between our space information system, which is Evolve, and Revit. It's more of a disconnected process where we export drawings and then import them. But it is absolutely used for Medicare. We have a couple of users that's all they use Sims for in the Med Center, and they pull all sorts of data about our square footages and how space is being used. Another thing that though, that's really been helpful with Revit is that even if we don't have the model ready to go and be able to push it into our space information system, we often get we require a space schedule to be delivered to us. And so we can at least load space information. Again, this is a benefit to Revit. One of those things you don't think about that we did not have in AutoCAD. Even if we don't have that model ready to go, I can very quickly get all the rooms and their square footages out of the model and get it into our system so those downstream systems can have access to it. And a lot of that happens a lot, especially in the med center, because they need the data pretty early on also.
Great.
One more question we had from the chat there is on BIM 360 again. Would you be considering looking at the live models, kind of stopping in? I think you kind of alluded maybe not so much and more of the published version to see again from the three-dimensional side.
Yeah, we don't know yet, but my feeling is that it's going to be more on the published side. We're just not sure yet how that's going to work. Whether it's going to be one of those things where, hey, just make sure every Friday you've published the most recent version, and then we can, if we want to look at it, we can. But this is really early, so I just don't know how it's going to work. And to be honest, we're probably going to have, even if we do go down this route, we'll probably have a couple pilot projects where we just try this out and see what it looks like and how it works before we'd ever do anything. So it's a little early to know.
Well, appreciate it, Joe. We don't have any more questions in the chat. Anyone else have something our last minute here? All right. Well, I want to thank you on behalf of AIA Columbus for giving this great presentation. I hope sort of clarified why we're doing what we're doing to better serve the university for those of us that are fortunate to engage with you guys. So thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you. It was great to be able to share with you. And if anybody has any other further questions, don't be afraid to reach out to me personally.
Excellent. Well, we'll probably actually put this recording up on our YouTube channel here in a little bit. And so if you want to go back on something, you're more than welcome to. So thanks again for everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.